Hi everyone from room 12 in Midrash Tarova. If anybody recognizes the background, I want to share with you a short idea on this week's Parshat Vayetze. There's a well-known discussion amongst Torah learners as to how to relate to the Avot, to Torah personalities, and through what type of lens should we understand their behavior and their actions. For those who are familiar with the idea, in Israel it became known as the issue of Torah b'gova ha'einayim. Do we learn Torah at the level of our own eyesight? Meaning, do we look at the Avot and Torah personalities of great stature as, indeed, great people, but nonetheless humans like everybody else? And therefore, it's okay to be very critical, and to be critical in ways that we sometimes critical about each other and our peers. I don't want to go into that argument right now. I do want to say, though, that when reading this parsha and the parashiyot that come up, or even Bichlal, reading all parashiyot in Sefer Bereshit, there does seem to be a sort of creation of an estrangement from the personalities of the Avot. I'll just take, for example, this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha, Parshat Vayetze, we read about Yaakov leaving his home and going to the house of Lavan in order to find a wife and to escape Esav. And there's the well-known dream that Yaakov has in Beit El, where the famous dream, V'nei sulam mutzav arza, v'rosho magia shamayma, v'nei malachei Elohim olim v'yordim bo. Yaakov has a dream about a ladder and the angels going up and down, and certainly depicting Yaakov Yaakov himself, our forefather, in a slightly, if you like, angelic sort of way of a person who dreams about angels ascending to heaven. Certainly something which maybe me and you and the regular person doesn't dream about and think about, and so on and so forth. It creates a certain estrangement. More so, I'd like to add that this idea of angels in the beginning of the Parsha actually reaches a certain type of closure at the end of the Parsha, right at the end of this week's Parsha, after Yaakov goes to Beit Lavan, gets married, has children, has the whole conflict that he has with Lavan, and eventually comes back towards Eretz Yisrael. So the Parsha, literally the second last pasuk in the Parsha, says, "Ve'Yaakov alach ledarko va'yifguu vo malachei Elokim." That when Yaakov was on his return back to Eretz Yisrael, on his way he was encountered by malachei Elokim, by angels of God, and as a result of that he calls the place Machanaim, etc., etc. Again, we see Yaakov coming back to Eretz Yisrael and not encountering people actually, but encountering, again, malachim, angels. And again, like I said before, how are we supposed to actually relate to this type of thing? I mean, can we encounter angels? Do we encounter angels? Have you ever encountered angels? And obviously, I think the answer that we're all giving to that question is no. How do we even know if we encountered an angel? What exactly do angels look like? Okay, interesting questions. So I actually want to offer a slightly, I would say, offbeat take on this, and that is based on two mefarshim. The one, we'll start with Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin actually talks about this issue of Yaakov and the angels at length. And the underlining sort of theme in the thought of Rabbi Tzadok, I wouldn't say it's just Rabbi Tzadok, but Rabbi Tzadok actually talks about it a lot and clarifies this idea. He makes the statement that malachim are, I would say, spiritual forces, or forces in reality that are created by a person's good deeds. A person does certain good deeds. Every good deed creates a certain malach, a certain angel, a certain force in a person's life, a spiritual force, a driving force in one's life, which leads to positivity. And that says Rabbi Tzadok, I'll just read the words that he uses for this. He says, Mikol mitzvah, from every mitzvah, nivra malach. A malach is created. What is a malach? Says Rav Tzadok, perush koach ruchani, a spiritual force. And that spiritual force is basically a consequence of man's actions, of a person's actions. And he even seems to suggest, Rav Tzadok, that when Yaakov Avinu comes back to Eretz Yisrael, and it says in the Torah at the end, Vayifku bo malachei Elohim, those malachei Elohim are in fact those spiritual forces which Yaakov Avinu created through his maasim, through his actions. When in Beit Lavan, those are the things that accompany him back and help him in his encounter with Esav. Anyway, we'll suffice with that for Rav Tzadok. So that's obviously a very interesting idea, which can certainly bring down to earth this idea of what it means to encounter angels. And it's something which, in fact, all of us can encounter, creating certain positivities, certain spiritual forces and mental forces in one's life by behavior is certainly something which we can all develop and understand. Another take on this, very interesting take, I was actually quite surprised to see it, is the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel, as you all know, asks many questions at the beginning of each parsha, and he asks some at the beginning of the parsha and the end of the parsha. And regarding these malachim that encounter Yaakov, the Abarbanel asks some really interesting questions, like, what exactly did these malachim do? Did they say anything? Did they ask for anything? What did they do? Okay? And what's also interesting, he says, is that in the end of this parsha, Yaakov encounters malachim, and in the beginning of the next week's parsha, Parshat Vayishlach, it starts with the exact same sort of concept, Vayishlach Yaakov malachim, that Yaakov sent malachim. Is there a connection between those malachim? Anyway, the Abarbanel offers some type of explanation, but then he actually answers alternative explanation. I want to share with you his words. He says the following. He says, "Ve'efshar od lefaresh shayu malachim asher pagu bo ovrei drachim, anashim midyanim socharim o zulatam, orcha achat o shtayim shavru alav." Says the Abarbanel, what are these malachim that Yaakov encounters at the end of the parsha when he comes back to Eretz Yisrael? He says they were ovrei drachim, anashim. They were people that were traveling, regular human beings that were traveling. And what did they do, these regular people? V'hem gilu et ozno v'sipru lo she'aya Esav b'derech sa'ir b'oto derech she'yahu olech v'shiyifga'u bo b'echreach. Okay? And they told him that Esav was on his way basically on the same path that Yaakov was on. Again, according to Abarbanel, these people, these regular people, were not angels. They're not Nevi'im, like some of the Mefarshim suggest. They were just regular people who happened to, if you like, bump into Yaakov, and they gave him information regarding his brother, which they had gathered from their own traveling. Now he says, well, if that's so, why does the Torah call them malachim? Why does it say malachim? So he says, Lachen krama katuv malachei Elokim, כי היו בעניינו כמלאכי אלוקים, מודיעים הדברים הצריכים לו בשמירתו. He says, why does the Torah call them malachim? Because from Yaakov's point of view, they indeed were like angels. Harry, what's an angel? An angel is like a messenger from Hashem in order to help a person. But the Abarbanel's implication is that that's not what happened over here. Not as if God sent malachim to help Yaakov. No. Yaakov happened to meet people on the way who informed him of the impending danger. And that's why Yaakov related to them as malachei Elokim. It's almost like, when somebody does you a favor in times of need and you say, you're an angel sent from Hashem. Literally, that's what the Abarbanel says. These regular people were for Yaakov malachim, as if they were angels. Then he carries on and says, he actually brings a similar thing in the story of Yosef. If you all remember, Yosef was looking for his brothers. Yaakov sent him to find his brothers. and he couldn't find him. And then he says that he bumped into a person, someone found him, and he asked them, where are they? And they said, and he asked him, where are my brothers? And he says they've left here and they've got to Dotan. And Chazal say, who was this ish? Who was this person? He was a malach. He was an angel. And Abarbanel again explains that Chazal weren't implying or suggesting, as a matter of fact, that this was an angel. But the person that gave him that information, because he knew that information, was for Yosef in that circumstance, an angel. Okay? And then he says like this, וככה קרא יעקב לאנשים ההם מלאכי אלוקים, כאלו ששלחה מהאלוקים להישארותו, ובעבור שנתחברו איתו המחנה, and so on and so forth. And therefher, that's why בעצם יעקב called them מלאכים. And based on that understanding, it turns out that this angelic life of Yaakov, or Yaakov's encounters with the angels, is indeed not necessarily has to be understood as something completely beyond our reality. And indeed, all of us can encounter angels, and maybe we do encounter angels all the time. Those people and those things in life which help us go in positive ways, which help us refrain from going on negative ways, and those indeed are the angels that Hashem sends us. Shabbat Shalom.